What's going on, everybody? My name is Ben Hauver. This is the definitive Week 11 cash game breakdown for the main slate on DraftKings.com. As always, I'm going to be going position by position and discussing every cash viable play on the slate. If you like this type of content, don't hesitate. Go ahead, follow me on Twitter at Ben Hauver, subscribe on YouTube, all of that good stuff. And be sure to check back throughout the week. I will continue to discuss cash game strategy and how potential news that we get on Friday, Saturday, and even Sunday morning will impact this slate and the optimal strategy. But let's get right into it. Starting off with quarterback, and I've got a really tight pool this week, and I think that that's a theme that we're going to see at every single position. I think the optimal plays at just about every position are pretty clear, at least up, to this point, Thursday afternoon on the slate. And at quarterback, I've got three guys headed off by, of course, Lamar Jackson. Now, looking at Lamar Jackson, he was last week's quarterback one on the slate, and the Ravens didn't even play him for the whole game. RG3 was out there in the fourth. The Ravens ran the fewest amount of offensive plays that they have all year, and Lamar Jackson still smashed. And, what we're seeing from him is, historic. It's not a stretch to say that at all. He's topped 60 yards rushing in 6 straight games. 2 of his last 4 games, he's put up 26 points or more on DraftKings with 0 passing touchdowns. The balance between his floor and his ceiling is so high. It's just really unheard of. And when it comes to the cash game strategy of playing a quarterback at 7,700, that seems like a lot. Typically we want to pay down for quarterback, but I think it's not a stretch to say that Lamar Jackson is the Christian McCaffrey of quarterbacks. What we're seeing from him, transcends position. When you look at it beyond position, when you separate it from the fact that he's a quarterback and you just look at, how can I spend $7,700 of my $50,000 DraftKings salary to get the safest amount of points? I don't see how Lamar Jackson, isn't the answer to that question. Make no mistake, what Jackson is doing has never really been done. He's on pace to outscore what Mahomes did last year, what Peyton did in 2013. If he keeps this pace, he's just going to continue to smash, and 7,700 is not too expensive to get that level of safety in your lineup. I really don't think it is. But, say we can't get to Lamar Jackson this week, and I'm going to be doing everything I can to get to Lamar Jackson. I don't care about the price. I just want to make that clear. But, say we can't. You can save $1,000 by going down to Dak Prescott, who, I think is in a good spot, but it's not as good of a spot. Dak is averaging a full 8.6 points less on the road versus at home. He is on the road this week. Despite that, he has had a pretty significant high floor / ceiling all year. Only 2 games under 21.5 DraftKings points. He's got 4 games above 28 points. So we're seeing that ceiling. The floor is there in most games. And this is the best matchup that he's faced all year. The Lions defense is completely crumbling. They are awful. And, I think there's only really one path to Dak failing to hit value, and that would be, if Zeke dominates all of the scoring in this game. If Zeke gets 3 touchdowns on the ground and Dak really is only left with, maybe 1 touchdown and the yardage that he piles up in this spot. But even so, I think that Dak is a really good mid-tier option here if we can't get to Lamar Jackson. Drew Brees, I skipped over him at 6,900. The thing is just I prefer Lamar if I'm paying up, and I think that I would prefer Dak to Brees in this spot as well. So, while Brees on the surface I think is a good play, and depending on how ownership shakes up, obviously will be a great stack with Michael Thomas, who we'll get to in a little while. But, I just don't really feel the need to include Brees in this, equation when Dak is right there. And if I'm going above Dak, I think it would be to get to Lamar. So, lastly here, I want to talk about Kyle Allen, who is the clear paydown option of the slate at 5,300. There's some reason to like Kyle Allen despite, the warning flags being present. I mean, when you look at these 3 guys we've talked about, Kyle Allen has the highest implied team total on the slate, 27.5 points compared to the Cowboys, who are 27.3, and the Ravens, who are 27.25. So I guess, we're splitting hairs here. All 3 of these offenses project pretty similarly, in this spot, but the thing with Kyle Allen is that the floor is considerably lower than just about, everybody else here. He's only averaging 33 attempts per game. And, as we'll get to in a moment here, Christian McCaffrey just dominates scoring on this team, which, significantly caps Kyle Allen's upside. But, when we look at it through the context of this slate, Christian McCaffrey is going to be chalk and DJ Moore is going to be chalk. So we've got two Panthers skill position players, including a pass catcher, as major chalk on the slate. It stands to reason that if both of those guys succeed, Kyle Allen would succeed as well. That being said, the floor is low. He's only got one game over 20 DK points this season. If you're simply going for a 3x play, by all means, I think Kyle Allen is safe to 3x. He's going to score, 15.9 DraftKings points this week. You could lock that down. That being said, I want ceiling, at least the potential ceiling out of a quarterback play. And just look at him. I know that there's a significant price gap, but Lamar Jackson has beat Kyle Allen's career high fantasy output in 5 out of the last 6 weeks. We're talking about Lamar Jackson's floor damn near being above Kyle Allen's ceiling. So while, that 2,400 price difference matters, I don't think that it is really enough of a reason to pay down to Kyle Allen, at least in my opinion. But, I'm going to continue to think about that throughout the week. And, I guess we'll see what the answer turns out to be. But, staying with the Panthers here and moving on to running back, Christian McCaffrey's price did not grow. He did not hit value. I guess you could say he didn't 3x his value at 10.5 last week, so they did not raise him. But, that being said, McCaffrey, I think, is a smash play. Once again, he's scored under 29 DK points only once in his last 7 games. So, even if he's not hitting 30, if he's hitting 29 for 10.5 and you can, take that to the bank, I'll lock that down all day, all night. There's not really a better way to spend your salary, I don't think, than just locking Christian McCaffrey down in cash on a week-to-week basis. He's got, a good history against Atlanta in the 2 matchups that they had last year. He averaged over 158 yards per game. He's gone over 140 all-purpose yards 7 out of 9 times this year, and he is tied with Aaron Jones for the most touchdowns by any skill position player. And unlike Aaron Jones, it's not coming in 3 and 4 touchdown bunches. It's just consistent every single week. McCaffrey is scoring. So, you can't really project any single player out there to have a better scoring projection in terms of touchdowns than Christian McCaffrey. I think that he is, once again, a lock button play in cash. Moving down in terms of price, let's look at some of the alternatives. And I think, for 8,900, Dalvin Cook is squarely in play. The Broncos were able to shock, a terrible Browns team at home in Brandon Allen's first start. Visiting Minnesota, traveling to Minnesota is going to be a different story. We don't really know the status of Adam Thielen as of yet on Thursday. I don't think he's trending in the right direction last I saw. And, Dalvin Cook has really been the main beneficiary, not Diggs, not Johnson. It's really been Dalvin Cook who's seen a spike in his pass game usage, over the last 3 weeks without Thielen, 6 targets, 7 targets, 7 targets. And he's touched the ball 18 times or more in every single game this year. Besides Christian McCaffrey, he's been the second most consistent running back / skill position player, out there in fantasy this year. And only 8,900, it's not as good of a matchup as, say, Christian McCaffrey or as these other guys on the list. But, in terms of usage, I think that Dalvin Cook is once again in an absolutely great spot. For $2,000 savings, though, you can go to Josh Jacobs. And I think that a lot of people are going to do that there. There's a ton of reasons to like Jacobs this year. He's a 10.5 point home favorite. The Bengals are traveling all the way from Ohio to the West Coast. Raiders hosting, coming off of 10 days of rest, as the last game they played was on Thursday night. And, the Bengals have just been absolutely smashed by running backs this year. They've given up 12 all-purpose touchdowns to running backs through 9 games, and Jacobs has been hyper consistent. There were some questions about whether or not he could handle the workload. He didn't really handle a substantial amount of touches in college, and people looked at that in 2 ways. Was he going to be able to handle it in the NFL, or maybe it was just saving him up to really be able to handle a ton of touches, and that's really what we've seen. He's averaged 23.4 touches per game over his last 4, put up 19 points or more in 4 of his last 5, and the one knock on him is that his receiving floor is low. His career high in targets is 5. He hasn't had more than 3 receptions in a single game yet. But, when we look at that on DraftKings, obviously we want those catches, but I really don't see any scenario where, there's a negative game script for Jacobs here. I mean, he should just hammer the ball on the ground. He should have a pretty high chance to score a touchdown in this spot. And I mean, what are the chances that, the Bengals are ahead at any point in this game? 10%? Less maybe? 6,900 for Josh Jacobs, I think, is a really good price tag, very appealing in cash games, and he's going to be massive chalk, in my opinion. I guess the main question here, and it seems like people aren't really debating this, but I definitely think it's worth discussing, is whether or not to play Tevin Coleman over Josh Jacobs. That 800 goes a long way, especially if we're trying to get up to somebody like, say, Lamar Jackson or one of these high-priced wide receivers we're going to discuss here in a minute. But, I think Tevin Coleman sets up to be in an equally great spot. The 49ers are 12-point home favorites. Matt Breida is expected to miss this game. And as all players facing Arizona, the 49ers skill position players should see spiked usage. Unlike Jacobs, Coleman will definitely share work. He's not going to get 100% of touches. Raheem Mostert will be sprinkled in, maybe a touch of Jeff Wilson Jr. here or there, but Coleman will be the unquestioned lead dog in this spot, and I think 6,100 is a fair price tag. I mean, he's got a propensity to scoring touchdowns in bunches, and this seems like a spot where that could happen. Increased play volume playing Arizona, and on the surface, I think Jacobs is a better play maybe for cash, and Coleman is the elite GPP pivot. But in this price range, I think we're going to have to make that decision, and that 800 could potentially go a long way this week. So it's at least worth discussing. And then finally here, Brian Hill, who I imagine will be the highest priced play on the slate. He was a 2017 fifth round pick by the Falcons, and the Panthers are the definition of a run funnel. Their pass defense has been elite. I think Bradbury's going to be back this week, and he's had a pretty good success rate against Julio Jones in the past. So, if the Panthers are able to lock down the outside, it stands to reason that they would be pounding the ball with Brian Hill. Now, there's 2 things to consider here. One, Brian Hill's pass game usage, or pass game efficiency, I should say, is questionable. He's really never had that role. He's never really had any role in the NFL, but I mean, it comes down to the matchup, I think, and the price in this spot at 4,800 for someone who projects to have, between 18 and 22 touches. The Panthers are giving up over 5 yards per carry, and there's really no competition for touches in this spot. Ito Smith is on IR. Freeman will not be playing, and the Panthers have allowed 17 touchdowns to running backs in 9 games. That's almost 2 touchdowns per game. So I think that Brian Hill is really a good play this week. He doesn't correlate well with Christian McCaffrey, which, I think, comes into play more so in tournaments than in cash. But it is worth noting that, typically rostering 2 running backs in the same game on opposing teams is not what you would call the optimal strategy. But let's discuss wide receiver. Michael Thomas has been priced up to 9,900, just 100 shy of the all-time highest wide receiver price we've ever seen on DraftKings. It was Antonio Brown a few years ago when he was at his peak. And Michael Thomas is at his peak right now. I mean, I think we have to recognize that. He has double the targets of the second closest Saint, on the team. When Breeze has been behind center this year, he has 11 or more targets in every game since week 4. That's 5 straight. And, he played the Bucs earlier this year. And in that game, he put up 44 points on DK, 11 for 182 and 2 touchdowns. Now, the thing with wide receiver, and this is really like a game theory question, is, can you pay 9,900 for a wide receiver, period? It's not like running back where the production is a lot more predictive. I think based on usage, there's a lot more variance that goes into wide receiver on a week-to-week basis. That being said, Michael Thomas is having a historic season, definitely clearly on pace to break the all-time catch record, which on a full point PPR site like DraftKings, means quite a bit. That being said, 9,900 is a lot to pay. And, at 8,300 last week, he was a clear slam dunk play, and even at 8,300, that's a lot to pay, I think, for a wide receiver in cash. 9,900 might put Thomas out of bounds. I still put him in the cash pool because obviously, kind of like I talked, with Lamar Jackson, if you're just separating it from position and looking at the most efficient way to guarantee points in your lineup, Michael Thomas has to be on that list. But I just think that we have to prioritize spending in a different way this week that would get us off Michael Thomas, in most outcomes here for cash. So it's worth considering. I'm not Xing him out of the cash pool. I mean, maybe there's a way that you can get to him, but I would prioritize, Christian McCaffrey, I think, if you're only going to play one, and chances are you are. Also on this list is Julian Edelman, who has been wildly consistent for the Patriots. He has 36 targets, more than the next closest Patriots pass catcher. He's averaging 12.25 targets per game over his last four. Philly is a pass funnel defense. They're really good against the run, but they are getting decimated by wide receivers. And, lower on this list, you'll see Mohamed Sanu at 5,100, who I'm definitely considering. He played 100% of snaps in week 9. That was only his second game with the Patriots, and he became a full-blown, full-time player, had 14 targets, converted that into 10 catches. And, Mohamed Sanu squarely in play as well. But, Edelman is, on pace to have a career year here with the Patriots if he can stay healthy down the stretch. So 7,600, I think, is a little bit more affordable than Michael Thomas in terms of a pay-up option at wide receiver. I think Edelman is probably the highest I would go in cash games. And then right below Julian Edelman, we've got Chris Godwin, who I think is squarely in play at 7,300. And, despite the entire offense for the Bucs struggling, the pass game especially last week, besides Ronald Jones, there's some reasons to think that we could go right back to Chris Godwin. I mean, he doubled up Evans in targets last week, 12-6. PJ Williams is back and healthy for the Saints in the slot, which means one thing and one thing only. It's that we need to smash slot wide receivers against the Saints. PJ Williams is one of the worst cover men in the NFL. It's surprising that he is still on an NFL roster, if you ask me. And, Godwin completely put it on him in their week 5 matchup. It was his second best output of the season, and I think that he could look to repeat that in this spot, no doubt about it. But, moving down to some of the mid-range guys, I touched on Mohamed Sanu, but, a little bit higher than that, DJ Moore at 5,900, I think, is going to be chalk on this slate. He has 100 yards in back-to-back games. That Michael Thomas game last week is fresh in everybody's mind. Now DJ Moore has the same matchup, against this Atlanta team that is allowing the 6th most points to wide receivers per game, the 7th most touchdowns to wide receivers per game. And DJ Moore has really taken hold of this wide receiver 1 spot for the Panthers. He's averaging 10 targets per game over his last 4, just been super consistent. And, I touched on this earlier. If everybody's going to play DJ Moore and everybody's going to play Christian McCaffrey, it does seem like Kyle Allen is in a good spot to, produce really well. It's just a matter of him versus Lamar Jackson. So we will continue to consider that. Tyler Boyd here at 5,200, right above Mohamed Sanu, and I think that's going to be the main choice. Boyd is the clear leader when it comes to this Bengals pass-catching core. The Raiders are allowing the 3rd most fantasy points to wide receiver, and they are particularly bad in the slot. They've allowed 73% of targets thrown to the slot to be completed. And Boyd plays 80% of his time in the slot. They've given up 6 touchdowns as well. Boyd seems like he should benefit from positive touchdown regression, just the rate he's being targeted. And the few amount of touchdowns he's caught. You would think something has to give in this spot. I guess it really just comes down to whether or not you think the Bengals are going to score at all. These Bengals wide receivers, whether it be Boyd or Auden Tate, have been in good spots a lot this year, and they haven't really helped you cash, I don't think. So maybe we need to get off of Boyd in this spot, but all signs point to him being a really solid play. Now, I included Kenny Stills on this list at 4,600. Now, this is completely contingent on, Will Fuller being out. So I'm not really going to dig too deeply into this. If Will Fuller plays, Stills is, not really in play. But I think that we want, a lot of access to this game. If we're going to have Lamar Jackson and Deshaun Watson facing off, there's a lot of reason to get, excited about that. And if Will Fuller's out and Kenny Stills is a full-time player again, 4,600 is cheap access at wide receiver, the most volatile position out here. I think that targeting Stills in that specific situation would make a lot of sense. Again, if Will Fuller plays, I don't think that I would consider Kenny Stills whatsoever at 4,600. And then finally at wide receiver, Deebo Samuel. I think Deebo Samuel has a chance here to be the chalkiest play we've seen all year. His price is clearly depressed because he played on Monday night. Emmanuel Sanders got injured in that game, and Deebo was the main beneficiary. He turned his, opportunity into an 8-catch effort for 112 yards on 11 targets. You combine that with the pricing coming out before Monday night, so he's only 4K. You combine that with Kyle Shanahan scorching Dante Pettis in the media this week, saying that his opportunity is going to, continue to diminish as his production has on the field. I really do believe that Deebo Samuel is going to be, one of the chalkiest plays we've seen all year. And if you ask me, it's great chalk. I'd be happy to play Deebo this week. If Sanders sits, he's a lock. And, if Sanders plays, he's still in consideration, I think, because at worst, with Kittle out, he's going to be the number 2 option in a great spot here. So, Deebo Samuel squarely in play, I think, regardless of whether or not Emmanuel Sanders plays, which it is trending in the wrong direction as of Thursday afternoon. Before I move on to tight end, I just want to shout out my favorite wide receiver play for GPPs this week, and that's Terry McLaurin. I think that his floor is a little bit too low to consider in cash. When you pair that with his price at 5,600, he's priced above guys like Sanu and Boyd and priced below Moore. So I think he's sort of priced out of cash consideration. But, in terms of just a pure play, I think that he's in one of the best spots to just completely smash this slate. I do just want to throw that out there. Like I said, the floor is a concern, under 8 DK points in 3 straight games. But, this spot against the Jets is exactly why we were on Godius Slayton, a.k.a. Darius Slayton, last week in cash. Hopefully, you viewers out there were one of the 3%-ish of people in double-ups who did play him in cash, as I did, and you benefited from that. But, at 5,600, people are going to be off of him. They're going to want to play a guy like Hollywood Brown at the same exact price. But, Terry McLaurin, started off really hot, and I think that with his college quarterback returning and becoming the starting quarterback here, we have a lot of reasons to like McLaurin against this terrible, terrible Jets secondary. But just wanted to throw that out there as a small note at wide receiver for GPPs if you do enjoy playing tournaments. Let's move on to tight end here. Again, tight pool. There's really only 3 guys at 3 different price points I'm considering. I'll start off with Darren Waller here. Waller's been held to under 10 DK points in 3 straight games, but he's in a prime bounce back spot. Now, 5,500 for a guy who has, under 10 DK points squarely in his range of outcomes is concerning, to say the least. But, I'm not quite sure if we can really hold that against him. It's just been funky games for the Raiders as of late, and, he is still the primary passing option against this terrible Bengals team. He's got 24 more targets than the next closest Raider. So, I think that Waller is the best play if you're going to be going above 5K. That being said, again, we're going to be trying to fit in a lot of expensive plays this week, potentially 3 running backs, 2 running backs above 6.5K, a quarterback above 7K. I mean, I don't know if we can get all the way up to 5.5 in cash games. So if you're going to be looking in that mid-range, 4.4, we've got Jared Cook, who I think is going to be really popular. You look at it from a matchup perspective, he's in a great matchup against the Bucs. He's scored between 12.7 and 14.1 in his last 3, so we've got a really consistent range to project him in. That being said, he has scored 2 touchdowns in that span, so, he's really not going to get it done with receptions and yardage in most situations. So you would have to sort of depend on a touchdown. I think that the optimal play this week, and it's probably the play I'm going to make, at least as of Thursday, it seems like the clear play. It's the salary you need. You can go down 1,500 off Cook and save that to get to Ryan Griffin. Now, Griffin is going to be basically a 100% snap type player. He played 94% of the snaps in weeks 8 and 9. Chris Herndon sent to IR for the season, and we saw Griffin get involved over that 2-game span in week 8 and 9, and I think that they're going to look to build towards that as they try and keep Sam Darnold comfortable. In week 8 against Jacksonville, caught 4 of 4 for 66 yards and 2 touchdowns. Obviously, we can't expect 2 touchdowns on a weekly basis, but the fact that you look to him so heavily in the red zone is encouraging for a guy who's only 2.9K. All we really need is 1. And he'll smash value. And then he showed that he could do it off yards as well against Miami. Had 8 targets, turned that into 6 for 50. And again, 2,900, it's a punt play, but I think that there's enough reason to suspect that, in a good matchup against Washington, that he could definitely, hit value and potentially go beyond that in this spot. Great salary relief play, in my opinion. And then finally moving on to DST defense here. It's a week where I think we're going to have to pay up a little bit. Pretty much everything under 2.5 just looks disgusting. Wouldn't really consider anything there. I guess the lowest price defense we can look at is the Dolphins. They've been a pretty terrible defense all year. That being said, over the last 2 weeks and the games that they've surprisingly won, they've scored 8 and 11 points at 2.5. I would definitely take that. They're a home team facing a division rival for the second time this season, which we know, we can expect that to be a lower scoring game. Josh Allen, clearly a turnover prone quarterback. So I think there's some reasons to consider Dolphins as our pay down option. And then besides the Dolphins here, it's really, I think, just who fits in your lineup. Last week I talked about how despite the Browns being a good surface play, I think that we needed to prioritize getting up to the Steelers because their floor and ceiling was higher. It was flat out higher. And, in that spot, the Steelers were worth targeting. And usually I don't think that we target defenses, and this week is no different. I'm not really targeting any of these defenses. I'm really seeing, if I can build my optimal lineup and then seeing what fits. And hopefully it is one of these 7 defenses that were listed. Obviously the 49ers are a smash play at 4K, and this is something that, I'll definitely be talking about more on the DFS Dose podcast, which you can check out Friday morning on any podcast platform or YouTube if you prefer. I'm really going to make it a point to talk on that podcast about whether or not we are going to really separate this week, point per dollar expectation versus position, because, if you're looking at the clearest way to get value out of your point per dollar, I think the 49ers at 4K might be that option. I mean, there's just an absolute, a smash play at 4K, but again, when it comes to a position like defense where, production is going to be so volatile and it's going to be so based on, who gets that lucky touchdown, who gets the pick six, the fumble recovery. And while the 49ers are probably the most likely for that to happen, I mean, you could play the Vikings at home against Brandon Allen. That's a smash. You could play the Raiders at home against Finley. That's a smash. You could play the Jets at home against Haskins. I mean, there's just so many inexperienced quarterbacks. I'm sorry, Jets are on the road, but right. Yeah. Yeah, Jets are on the road. Sorry, I was tripping there, but even so, I think that really any of these defenses are viable, just sort of depending on where your salary fits. So I would not be making a concerted effort or definitely making any types of sacrifices to get to any of these defenses. It's really just whoever fits, and hopefully, you guys can do that as well. But that's going to be it for me this week on the Week 11 cash breakdown. Ran a little long on this one, but hopefully that means that there was good information in here. Hopefully you guys got something out of this. Like I said at the top of the show, you can follow me on Twitter at BenHauver, BenHauver, or just look at the bottom right side of the screen and see that. Let's have a great week in cash. Check back on my Twitter Sunday morning for any updates that are, absolutely pivotal. And yeah, that's all I've got for you this week. I will see you on Monday where we review the cash game team I landed on, and hopefully, like last week, it'll be well above the cash line as we smash yet again. So thanks for watching, and I will see you guys on Monday.